vision.
So, folks, I get on this guy often because he's blocked me. I can't comment to him. But
without Rodgers,
listen to this.
I would pick us to beat the Raiders.
I would pick us to beat the Raiders.
They don't have an offense. Okay, they don't have a quarterback or a coach.
He picked the Chargers too. He wasn't fearing of them. He said their quarterback chokes. He can't believe their
You can't score touchdowns, but I'm not.
coach wasn't
I'm not
fired.
canceling the season personally.
Watch him flip
now
flop
we got-
here.
The news story is with a quarterback, and Robert Saleh was asked by Michael Kay, hey, why haven't you given Trevor Siemian a shot? You know, you gave Mike White a shot last year, and the passing offense got better. Why not give Siemian a shot? And Robert Saleh said, I don't know. He said, you got me. And he said, I plead the fifth. Which,
Fireable.
You know, part of me when I first heard it was like, all right,
Fireable
this is
offense.
an exhausted head coach just giving a. But man, I plead the fifth. That's literally what you say when you have information that you're withholding because you don't want to incriminate yourself or somebody else above you. So I think it's pretty safe.
Will he say Joe Douglas? This is the biggest Joe Douglas lover.
Be it Joe Douglas, Woody Johnson, the president of the United States.
He's got a man crush on Joe Douglas.
Is saying you got to ride it out with Zach. And I think that if I had to guess,
He's going to say
I
it.
think that their strategy probably from. If I had to just guess, I would probably say Joe Douglas. Honestly, I know
He said it.
Woody, but did you hear how Woody talked about the quarterback situation?
But he'll flip-flop.
Last year? You know how bad Woody wanted Aaron Rodgers. So
Let's put this
if
down.
I had to guess, their outlook on the quarterback situation heading into the year was: look, we're going to go with Rodgers. We're going to try to win a Super Bowl. If Rodgers goes down, instead of maybe having a higher floor, more experienced, a little more expensive backup quarterback, that could marginally increase the win total, increase the chances of making the playoffs. Instead of that, we're going to try to squeeze whatever possible chance there is left that Zach Wilson would make, at least statistically, probably the biggest career turnaround of a quarterback.
Did he just say instead of making the playoffs that we're going to just see something else?
I don't think there's been a guy who has stats have been this bad who turned it around to be the long-term solution for the team that drafted him since maybe Steve Young.
This guy wasn't alive when Steve Young played.
So they're like, we're going to take whatever chance that is that could happen. And all right, I don't think it's a horrible strategy if Rodgers goes down for a month and you kind of want to see what you have in Zach. And it's been proven that Zach can be a guy who can, as a backup quarterback, can go out there.
He has.
Rodgers has to miss a month. Can make sure you don't go 1-3, 0-4. That's proven, right? Therefore,
how is it proven?
With Zach. And
No, Buffalo. They won despite him.
I don't think Zach is the only problem with this offense. There's been many. In fact, there's been many games where I don't even think he's the first or second.
There we go.
In terms of the fact that he's a backup quarterback.
He's not even the first or second problem, Buffalo.
Most backup quarterbacks around the league would be doing things a ton differently given the circumstances. That's just my opinion. You can say I'm apologizing for him.
You apologize for everybody.
I pretty much wrote him off as a number 2 overall pick. But if you
didn't write him off.
Middle of the pack backups around the league and throw them in here, or throw Trevor Siemian in there, and think it's going to be a lot better behind that offensive line and with this coaching staff and with the receivers having the dropsies, I just don't believe that to me.
Well, Buffalo Jets fan, it happened last year when they put Mike White in with the same fucking offensive line and a worse group of wide receivers.
True. Yeah, I'd be interested to see it, just to know, but I don't believe that to be true.
He doesn't.
But at the same time,
here's a flip-flop.
You kind of have to judge the process and the planning a little bit, and I do think it was kind of poor process and poor planning to not at least, once Rodgers goes down, now you don't need a backup quarterback. You kind of need a starter or as close as you can get to one, and they kind of balked at the chance to at least get some competition in there with Zach Wilson. If crap does hit the fan,
what is he saying?
Make a change to give a spark. And you saw.
Should he play? Should he not play? I mean, there's
Josh Dobbs,
2 minutes left in this video.
Allegedly, Jacoby Brissett could have been had, or Carson Wentz, who he's trash, but I don't know, man. He's like 18 months removed from what would be like the second best Jets quarterback season in 20 years. You know what I mean? So it seems like to me, if I had to guess, they kind of, when they brought in Siemian, and look, I know there's a lot of tangents here, but I want to make sure I cover all the stuff.
You're going nowhere, buddy.
Comments aren't ready. And I appreciate you guys watching, but sometimes, man, it's like I feel like people don't listen before they start typing away. I don't think Trevor Siemian. Look, he couldn't win a job in Cincy as a backup. There's been more quarterback injuries this year.
Okay, I've had enough, folks. I've had enough. So, what are we actually saying here? What are we actually saying here, Buffalo Jets fan? You ever, folks, you ever like somebody, but you can't stand them? This is the guy. This is the guy that I would be friends with, but I couldn't admit it to anybody. I like him, but I can't. I just can't listen to him. I mean, he could just drive you. He could just drive you mad. So, folks, I'm stunned here. I call these fans like Buffalo surface thinkers. They just don't understand below the surface. It's football. Your defense is good now. The more they're on the field because of Zach Wilson, the tireder they get, the more apt for injury is going to happen. And beyond that, you punt this year, next year it's another year. You can't afford to keep everybody. It's a salary cap league. You don't know how they're going to play. You don't know how other teams are going to improve. You have this small window of opportunity. And you're basically saying on here that they're kind of like, punting their chance for the playoffs almost because Joe Douglas wants to be right about Zach Wilson? Folks, in a video right before this, he mentions Tyrod Taylor, Daniel Jones, playing on the same team, the same offensive line, the same horrible wide receivers, how it's drastically different. Last year with Mike White, I think sometimes when there's a change, players get 10, 20% better. It's like subconscious. Anybody who's played organized sports knows that when you're missing your big batter or when you're missing your best running back, the team gets down. And then if that person magically appears, and they play, it gets everybody up. You don't want to fail certain people. And that's why the Aaron Rodgers things was good, because I think everybody would have played that much better for him. It's subconscious. The problem with Aaron Rodgers is that once you sign him, you become a whore to him. You've got to take all the other receivers. He's the godfather for one of them. You've got to do what he says, because basically he's smarter than Joe Douglas. He's smarter than Robert Saleh. I don't mind him being in charge. But you have to realize it. Forget it. You can't get rid of it. You have roster spots being wasted with a Lazard. He's not a wide receiver too. But you can't do anything because you can't piss off Aaron Rodgers, because he has this personality where you just can't irritate him. But why Jets fans can't realize, and I go through this argument, with a ton of people out there, that it's the offensive line, that it's this, that it's that, and it's not Joe Douglas. Folks, Joe Douglas was brought here again. And again, the reason I started this entire station, and I know I only have 44 listeners, subscribers, and it's a crime. I started this because I could not believe the love for Joe Douglas is the worst GM we've had. And we've had bad ones. And it's evident by the record. The Jets, and Troy Aikman actually said it best, are a bad team. The Jets are a bad team with a really good defense. Their defense keeps them in games despite the poor quarterback play. If you've got Breece Hall, and Breece Hall is a top 5 running back, and you've got Garrett Wilson, and he's a top 5 wide receiver, and it's a crime. I mean, people should be in jail if this guy has 2 touchdowns. Tell me that Garrett Wilson's not on the phone with his agent right now saying, you got to get me out of here. I'm going to either get killed with all the high passes, or I'm losing valuable dollars here because my quarterback can't get me the ball. Their team is historically the worst maybe in 45 years on third downs. Joe Douglas was brought in here to solve 2 problems, an offensive line and a quarterback. He did neither. Isn't that fireable? Isn't it fireable when you're in last place every season you've been here? Now, this is what I get. Well, he was given a bad the Jets were 9-7 when he took over. 7-9, I'm sorry. I get he was given a bad team. Well, now it's 5 years into it. he basically had to make the biggest decision. Again, it was Becton, but bigger than that was Zach Wilson. He decided not to take a bunch of first-round draft picks, keep Sam Darnold, and try it out. And if Sam Darnold didn't work, he would have had 3 number 1 draft picks probably, his own and 2 others that probably would have he gotten for the number 2 pick. He bet, he lost. And if you watch my channel, you'll go on. I do a really in-depth analysis on Zach Wilson, who I watched at BYU. I knew what he would be, and so did most BYU fans. It's not a personal attack on Zach Wilson. I don't know Zach Wilson. He's my hero. He's banging older women. He seems like a nice guy. He is just not a good quarterback. The game is too fast for him. You ever play somebody, in a video game you think you're good at? You're playing Madden or you're playing somebody else, and they're just so much better. They just see everything. They get rid of the ball before you sack them. You think you got their receivers covered and you don't. Or you're playing any sport. There's just some people who are just gifted, and they see it better. He doesn't. He was athletically superior in college. He can't outrun people here. We hear about his legs. It's not great. He gets hunted down pretty easily. He holds the ball too long. He's a one-read quarterback, and that's just it. He happens to be in a time where the Jets have a really good defense that keeps them in games. We've also gotten incredibly lucky this year. Against Buffalo, we had to get 4 turnovers to win the game in overtime. Against the Giants, you hold them to 9 negative yards, and you have a really good field goal kicker miss a 36-yard field goal for us to win the game in overtime. The one game that they won in Denver, most Jet fans left that game at halftime. I was sitting there by myself. That was a game, again, that was gifted to them. So you got to look at the wins, and you got to basically say it's not sustainable. And thank God for some of these Jets content people. I think Jets 24, So Ryan's another apologist, and Green Bean, O'Leary's okay. Asman and Buffalo are the worst. They both have muted me. God, I forget his name right now. Oh man. He's excellent, and he's I'll get it down there, but he at least has the balls to say whose fault it is. He's not afraid, unlike Ryan on Jets 24/7, who got on the field. If you go to the game and you get on the field, you must have some influence with the Jets management to get on the field. You therefore can't be critical of Joe Douglas. You can't be critical of Joe Douglas and do that. And Boy Green's another guy. He had me on a show. I was a caller, and he listened to what I have to say. He hasn't blocked me, but again, I accuse him. Hey, in your job, maybe you're a little bit swayed because you can't attack Jets management because then you don't have access to the players, and he's had some, people on there. But, maybe not. Definitely Jake Asman. Jake Asman has, before he blocked me, basically sent me a note that he doesn't believe it's Joe Douglas's fault, and if it was, he'd admit it. He's got this Napoleonic complex there where he will sit there and argue and put you in the shadow room or whatever the fuck he does. But then when Emmitt Smith nicely says, Zach Wilson sucks, he sits there and he got his cheeseburger smile on and, goes with it. So I think a lot of the content providers are hypocrites because they've got hidden agendas there and they want access to it. And meanwhile, Buffalo Jets fan, again, seems like a nice enough guy. He's got 11,000 subscribers and doesn't really say anything. He was challenged once to go through all of Joe Douglas's draft picks. And he started and he saw the writing on the wall. Then the person who asked him was like, well, are you going to continue it? And he got so mad, well, no, I'm not going to do it. It was just childish. Because if you go through the 60 to 90 or so draft picks and free agents, you will find an utter failure. And just because one side of the field is good, and trust me, folks, if you give your 5-year-old enough number 1 draft picks, you're going to hit on it. And what Joe Douglas does, he hits on like the dollar store items. Some undrafted free agents, so blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, the best player on the Jets is Quinnen Williams, picked by Mike McCagan, who everyone seems to hate. And I would say Quincy is here because Quinnen is here. Or Quinnen is here because they signed Quincy. So, folks, it's not a personal attack on Zach Wilson. If you're a Jets fan, and you're a real Jets fan, you have not seen the Jets at the playoffs in 14 years. All you want is a playoff game. Some Jets fans like me, all I want to do is have a winning record. Some Jets fans, all we want to do is beat the Patriots once. So everybody has their goals. So you have your goal, whatever it is. Well, what are your objectives to get to your goal? If one of your objectives is to do any of those things, I don't think you can do any of the things that I just said with Zach Wilson as your quarterback. I think the team doesn't like him. Opponents don't respect him. They stack the box. They stop your run. And the inability to score or to do anything else. You get somebody else in here. You put a jolt in your team, a la the Raiders. And I don't think the Raiders are going to sustain it. But you know something? You basically change your quarterback. You change your coach and your GM. And all of a sudden the players are like, okay, they just bet on us. We've got to get better. We've got to basically do it. We got to play with some urgency. Look what happened. They basically took our side. And with the Jets, it's got to be the same thing. It's like, if you're a Jets player, it's frustrating. If you play an organized sport and you've been a good player on a bad team, you're frustrated. You just want to win. You just want to win. And basically, you've got a defense playing winning football, and they're probably going to end the season under 500. They're probably going to end the season just good enough not to make the playoffs, which just fucks up their draft pick. And then you see what happens with a fucked up draft pick this past year when you don't take an offensive lineman that you desperately need and you take a defensive player that you don't need. So I don't know what it's going to be, but I want fans who are critical of me, critical of what I'm saying, to understand the goal is to make the playoffs. If they lose in the playoffs, it's a great season because you made something you haven't done in 14 years. So make the playoffs, grow from that, try to keep some of your players, get Aaron Rodgers back, get another quarterback. Zach Wilson needs to be off the team. You're not grooming him anymore. It's done. It's over. It didn't work. Go into the draft or go to free agency, get another quarterback, hope that Aaron Rodgers plays here another year, 2, or more, however long he wants to play, because you've invested in him. It's his show. But Zach Wilson needs to be as far away from this team as humanly possible. And again, not because he's an asshole and poor. I get poor kid. Zach Wilson, before he's 25 years old, will have made $35 million. He is making generational money, folks. Don't feel bad for Zach Wilson. He already comes from a very good family, so it's not some, poor kid living on the streets. He is a millionaire. He is making more money than anybody that's listening to this show and all of us combined. He had one great season during a COVID year in college with no fans in there for a very shit school that played watered down talent. And he profited from that more than anybody. He doesn't have it. The game's too fast for him. We've seen it. It's 3 years now. So, folks, again, it's not a personal attack on Zach Wilson. It's like, I just want the Jets to make the playoffs. And what I'm seeing right now is an offense that just can't do that. They're the worst in football. He's 36th out of 36 quarterbacks eligible for EPA. The whole game plan is for him not to mess up. So, is the offensive line bad? Yes, the offensive line was bad last year for Mike White. The offensive line for the Giants was bad with Tyrod Taylor. You make a change. And you hope that something changes. You hope for a jolt in your team because every win matters. The Jets might lose out of the playoffs by a game or two. You've got to go into Las Vegas and you've got to beat a team that you are more talented than. And you've got to put these teams away. You can't go into overtime with the Giants. You can't get smothered by the Dallas Cowboys. You're better than that. But once this team goes down, it's like, and for baseball fans, you'll realize this. Getting Garrett Cole for the Yankees was great, but how great is it now? How great is it now? They're not doing anything in this window of opportunity where he's great. He's already showing signs of not being as great as he was when he was here. You've got Aaron Judge, but now he's on the other side of 30. So you've got all these pieces in here. There's still a window of opportunity. They're up at the peak and they're down on this way right now. So you've got the Jets, they're up here right now on their defense. It's not going to be sustainable. One injury there. One Breece Hall, God forbid, injury. One Quinnen Williams injury. It all changes. So get your best chance to win now. The problem is that, and this is what I believe. Obviously, I don't know Joe Douglas, but he just seems to be an arrogant prick who wants to be right, who realizes that his career is probably not with the Jets. You and I fans will be here way after Robert Saleh and way after Joe Douglas are gone. And we were here way before they were even here. While they were working for other NFL teams, they don't necessarily care about the New York Jets. I'm assuming they want to do the best job. But Joe Douglas will be hired someplace else, maybe not as a GM. Robert Saleh will be hired someplace else, maybe not as a coach. They'll still be in the NFL. They'll still make plenty of money. And we'll still be here cleaning up or watching their messes being cleaned up. That's why I wish the Jets would, I don't know what a Wayne Corbett or, Lavernius Coles, I watch their podcast. I don't know, get some Jets players who are like, no football, but they care about the team, where they may not get a job someplace else. Put them in there. Put them in there. And Jet fans will feel like, okay, this is one of our homegrown, not some guy who coached the 49ers, or some guy like Joe Douglas who tried to be an actor, who had a part on Keanu Reeves' movie. If you watch my show, you'll see which one. The Replacement Players. He couldn't get a job. He changed his major. He couldn't handle the math part of it, so he got into communications. Yet you never hear him communicate. It's so frustrating because you want so much more for this team. And the frustrating part is it's the fan base. It is the most uneducated fan base that I've ever seen. I don't know if it's a youth, if they're just so young, or I don't know. They're so happy with mediocrity. Maybe they haven't suffered enough. And I don't mean that there's not Jet fans who don't get it. I do have some who get it, but the content, what I receive from people, some guy, he goes on shows showing that Zach Wilson is actually playing excellently. I mean, you almost need to have a breathalyzer sometimes before you go on to social media and even type something. I mean, it's just beyond ludicrous. Take it from players, take it from Eli Manning, take it from Peyton Manning, who I have on my shorts, what they say about this guy, Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Richard Sherman, people who watch the games, who know what it is. Again, is it all Zach Wilson? Well, no. But for Zach Wilson to be any good, he needs everything to be working. Everything's not going to work for this team. Everything's not going to work. So we need a quarterback who can be good when things aren't great in front of him. With Zach Wilson, everything needs to be great. He needs to basically have a Brinks truck in front of him. He needs his one read to be wide open. And hopefully he won't overthrow him. All right, folks, we're out of here.